Hey guys, tonight we wake up somewhere. Unexpected. It's not your usual soft duvet and Spotify playlist situation. Nope. You're curled on a thin straw mattress, wrapped in a wool blanket that smells of bleach and cabbage. The room is dim, the stone walls are damp, and outside the door, a bell clangs. Too early and far too loud for your liking. You've woken up in a Victorian workhouse. There's a sour taste in your mouth and a pit in your stomach. Not just because of the weak tea you'll be offered for breakfast, but because of something heavier. Your reputation. It's gone. Shattered. You are what they call, with more pity than precision, a fallen woman. Your crime. Not theft, not violence, not even speaking back to a vicar. You simply strayed, perhaps from home, from expectations, or from a husband who was less than gentle. You might have taken coins from a man in a dark alley, or maybe you were just caught standing alone on a corner at dusk. Doesn't matter. The label sticks, and no amount of scrubbing in cold water will wash it off. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're listening right now, drop your location and local time in the comments. I love seeing where everyone's drifting off from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You swing your legs over the edge of the bed. Well, it's more of a cot, really. And your feet meet the icy flagstones below. A sour-faced matron peers in through the doorway and barks that it's time for roll call. Your fellow inmates, because that's really what you are, shuffle into line like a parade of ghosts. Their eyes are tired. Some are no more than girls. One clutches a bundle that whimpers softly. The workhouse isn't jail, not technically. But some days, it's hard to spot the difference. Here, you're stripped of your belongings, your choices, even your own clothes. You wear a shapeless grey smock, identical to the women beside you. Uniforms keep things orderly, they say, though some whisper it's really about erasing identity. After all, it's easier to look away when no one has a name. Breakfast is served in silence. A ladle of weak gruel, a scrap of bread, and maybe a teacup of something warm if the boiler's working. There's no conversation, just the dull clink of tin spoons and the occasional cough echoing off the stone walls. And the smell, did we mention that? It's a special blend of mildew, sweat, and overboiled turnips. If this were a perfume, it would be called Victorian Reality No. 5. As you sit at the long wooden bench, you glance sideways at a woman across from you. Her hair is cropped short. Lice prevention, they say, but her eyes are sharp. She might have been beautiful once, under kinder lighting. She doesn't speak, but there's a certain grim solidarity in the way she doesn't look away. You're both here. You both fell. Historians still argue whether workhouses were truly meant to help the poor, or to punish them into productivity. The answer probably depends on how warm your house was growing up. Reformers said these institutions were necessary evils, a way to offer shelter without encouraging laziness. But when you're shivering in a scratchy dress, darning someone else's socks with bleeding fingers, the phrase moral improvement feels a little thin. The term fallen woman was as slippery as a London cobblestone in the rain. It might mean a prostitute, but also a woman who had a child outside marriage, or simply left her husband, or got caught in the wrong place at the wrong time. Fallenness was a shadow, not a fact, and once it settled on you, it clung. You shuffle into the sewing room for the morning shift. The matron reads aloud from Proverbs while you stitch. Your task? Embroidering pillowcases with delicate initials for women who will never hear your name. Your needle pricks your finger, and a tiny dot of red blooms on the white cotton. You suck your finger quickly. No one notices. Or rather, they notice, but pretend not to. Blood on linen is just another Tuesday. And then comes the part you weren't prepared for. The rules. Not just the obvious ones. No speaking, no fidgeting, no falling asleep on your feet, but the strange whispered ones. Don't look at the overseer too long. Don't cry at chapel. Don't laugh at all. One woman broke that last rule last week. She giggled during the Psalms, just a little hiccup of sound, and was sent to scrub the privies in the rain. No bonnet, no shoes. Some say she caught a chill and hasn't spoken since. There are lighter moments, if you squint. An older woman, clearly someone's long-lost grandmother, hums tunes under her breath when the matron isn't nearby. A girl with freckles steals sugar cubes from the kitchen and shares them under the laundry tables. And every now and then, someone tells a joke so dry and strange that it loops back around to funny. Like, why did the angel fall? Because the staircase had no railing. You laugh, quietly. But still, it feels like rebellion. A fringe detail. The workhouse employed penny watchers, low-paid inspectors tasked with measuring your productivity to the minute. Some even kept notebooks tracking who blinked too much. You'd roll your eyes, but that's also on the list of offenses. By late afternoon, your back aches and your fingers are stiff. You've finished 3 pillowcases, 8 handkerchiefs, and a set of baby clothes for someone else's baby. A different matron herds you toward the washing yard, where steam rises from giant copper tubs. You'll take turns agitating sheets with a wooden paddle. The water is hot, but somehow you're still cold. As the day winds down, you hear the church bells marking 6 o'clock. Supper is more of the same. Bread, gruel, and one lonely boiled carrot. You eat it anyway. It's the closest thing to flavor you've had all day. Later, tucked beneath your scratchy blanket once more, you listen to the silence. It's not peaceful. It's just tired. Tomorrow will come with more stitches, more lectures, and more quiet despair. But for now at least, you've survived day 1. The morning bell doesn't just ring. It drills itself into your skull like it's personally offended by the concept of sleep. You jolt upright on your cot, and for one surreal moment, you forget where you are. Then you see the damp stone, the matron's shadow, and the same shapeless smock waiting on the stool. Right, you're still a fallen woman in a Victorian workhouse. Spoiler, it hasn't been a dream. You shuffle to the wash basin, where the water is so cold it stings. There's no soap left. Someone swiped it last week, and the staff apparently decided clean enough is the new standard. You splash your face anyway. It's less about hygiene and more about pretending you have some control. Breakfast is grey. That's really the only word for it. Grey mush, grey tea, grey sky leaking in through the cracked windows. You nibble your way through it, eyes half-lidded, body on autopilot. The only excitement? The freckled girl from yesterday manages to sneak 2 sugar cubes this time. She's basically a criminal mastermind now. But you're starting to learn the rhythm here. How to keep your head down just enough. When to blink so it doesn't count as defiance. Which matron likes tattlers, and which ones fall asleep mid-sermon. Every moment is a quiet negotiation for survival. After breakfast, it's back to needlework. This time it's shrouds. Yep, as in burial garments. You try not to read too much into the symbolism. The wool is scratchy and the room smells like mildew and old flowers. The air's so still that you can hear someone sniffle 3 tables over. Probably Mrs. Price, whose son died in a mine collapse last year. She never says his name, but she sews like she's trying to reach him, stitch by stitch. Fallen women weren't all the same, despite the way society tried to flatten them into one tragic category. Some were survivors of abuse. Others were teenage girls misled by promises of love. A few were just poor and unmarried with a child on the way. Still others? They were simply women who didn't play by the rules. And that, in Victorian England, was often the greatest sin of all. You glance at a nearby woman, maybe 35, with neat braids and a surprisingly upright posture. She whispers to the girl beside her about the time she served a duchess. Her ladyship never tied her own shoes, she says. Didn't even know how. There's a flicker of pride in her voice, even now. A reminder. Everyone here had a life before this. You included. There's a knock at the door. A visitor. The whole room shifts. Shoulders straighten. Hands still. Because here's the thing. Being a fallen woman means you're always on display. Especially if someone important walks in. Today, it's a lady from the Rescue Society, dressed in impeccable navy wool with a velvet collar and gloves that have never touched coal or cabbage. She's come to inspect the progress of the inmates. Sorry, the rehabilitated ladies. She walks slowly, gaze lingering on your stitches. Well, she says after a pause, at least some of them have nimble fingers. That's promising. You force a smile. The matron beams. Everyone pretends this is encouraging. Rescue societies were a big deal in the 19th century, especially for women labeled as fallen, and they were founded by well-meaning reformers, often upper-class women, who believed they could save these souls through strict discipline and prayer. Historians still argue whether these groups were compassionate or condescending. In some cases, they offered real help, training, shelter, second chances. In others, they simply polished the cage. You're ushered out for a walk in the yard. Well, walk might be generous. It's 20 minutes of standing around under grey skies, while someone reads aloud from the Book of Job. The irony is not lost on you. A fringe tidbit. Some reform homes would assign each woman a new name, a fresh identity, like a witness protection program minus the protection. Sarah might become Hope, or Mary might become Patience. You can almost hear the eye roll echo across history. You haven't been renamed yet. Maybe that's a good sign. Or maybe they just haven't gotten to you. After the yard, there's a lecture. The topic: chastity and cleanliness, two halves of the same soul. It's delivered by a chaplain with thick spectacles and the social charisma of a coat rack. He goes on for 45 minutes. You count the cracks in the ceiling and wonder how many women sat under this exact speech, wondering the same thing. Some of the women in the row behind you start nodding off. One gets a nudge from the matron, and another gets dragged out altogether. You don't see her again that day. Victorian attitudes toward morality were a tangled mess of religion, class anxiety, and good old-fashioned fear of women's autonomy. To them, a woman who fell wasn't just a personal tragedy, she was a social threat. Proof that sin could sneak into even the most respectable homes. Which is why so much effort went into isolating, labeling, and rehabilitating you. It wasn't just about your soul. It was about maintaining order. Dinner is boiled beef fat and something that might have once been a potato. You eat it anyway. Hunger isn't picky. That night, lying in your cot, you overhear hushed whispers between two girls. One talks about running. Not metaphorically, actually running, leaving, escaping. She's heard of a mission house in Manchester that takes women in without questions. The other girl snorts and says, "And how far do you think you'll get in this dress?" You don't say anything, but your fingers tighten around the edge of your blanket. Not because you're planning an escape. Not yet. But because for one wild second, you think about it. The next morning, you wake before the bell. There's a sliver of dawn pushing through the grimy window, coloring the floorboards with a light so faint it almost looks like hope. You sit up quietly, stretching your back, still sore from yesterday's endless stitching. Around you, snores and murmurs fill the air. Women dreaming of other lives, or muttering names in their sleep they'll never say aloud while awake. You don't dream much anymore. Not deeply. Your sleep is more like a shallow puddle than a warm sea. But even so, last night something drifted across your mind. A memory of sunlight on river water, and someone calling your name from a distance. Not your new name, your real one. The one no one uses here. Once the day officially begins, the gears of routine grind into motion. You're assigned to laundry this time, Not the polite kind with dainty soap flakes and breezy linens, but a steaming room of iron kettles, stiff aprons, and water that boils so fiercely it practically growls. Welcome to the Victorian version of a spa day, minus the cucumber slices and scented oils. You haul a tub of wet bedding toward the wringer, muscles burning from the weight. Every step sloshes the sour-smelling water onto your shoes, soaking your hem. It doesn't matter. You'll be wet all day. Laundry work in institutions like this was both punishment and salvation. It kept you busy, gave you structure, and, in theory, cleansed you, symbolically scrubbing away your sins with every sheet and shirt. Historians still argue whether it was meant to rehabilitate or humiliate. Maybe both. Maybe that was the point. By mid-morning, your hands are red and raw, scrubbed nearly bloodless by harsh lye soap. You try not to wince. A girl next to you, her name's Jane, you think, lets out a sharp hiss as she accidentally scalds her fingers. No one rushes to help. There's no nurse, just a quick mutter from the overseer. Mind the water. A quirky detail? Some workhouse laundries used water from graveyard wells. Apparently it saved costs. Nobody really asked why it was cheaper. As you feed the sheets through the wringer, an enormous wooden contraption that looks like it was built to flatten horses, you spot something odd stitched into the corner of one. A tiny M embroidered in white thread. You wonder whose it was. Someone's baby blanket? A rich lady's monogrammed handkerchief? A servant's apron? There are ghosts in these linens. Quiet lives folded into tight corners. After lunch, dry bread and something greenish called pottage. You return to the chapel for moral instruction. Another lecture, this one by a visiting preacher with a flair for theatrical pauses. He reads from a pamphlet titled The Dangers of Vice and the Virtue of Industry. He says the word vice no less than 17 times. You count. His message is clear. You've fallen, but you can rise, if you're obedient, silent, and hardworking enough, and if you never expect to be fully accepted again. He doesn't mention men, not once. It's like you fell all by yourself. That's the thing about Victorian views of fallen women. The shame wasn't just yours to carry. It was entirely yours to carry. The man who seduced you, abandoned you, married someone else while you wept into your sleeves. He's out there in the world, probably making good money and shaking hands. You, meanwhile, are here, peeling skin off your fingers in a boiling room and being told how to pray better. Later that day, you're assigned to folding the finished laundry. A quieter task. You relish it, if only for the momentary stillness. You let your hands move automatically, smoothing creases, aligning seams. Across from you, Mrs. Denby, the oldest woman here, possibly pushing 60, tells you about a time she danced at a harvest fair. It was lanterns and cider and lace ribbons, she says dreamily, and I wore red slippers. You don't have the heart to ask where the red slippers are now, she sighs. One mistake, that's all it took. A single misstep. That's a theme you're starting to recognize. For some, it was a romantic evening gone wrong. For others, it was being born poor or orphaned too young. Sometimes falling had nothing to do with romance at all. Maybe you were caught stealing bread, or simply wandered too far from what society deemed respectable. The rules were slippery, the penalties permanent. You think of all the language people use to describe women like you: ruined, wayward, loose, immoral. And always the implication that it's a path you chose. Like there was a nice clean fork in the road, one direction labeled lady, the other sin, and you skipped merrily toward doom in a borrowed petticoat. The truth: most women here never even saw the fork. A bell rings. Not the meal bell this time, the visitor bell. This gets everyone's attention. Visitors are rare. When they happen, they bring the whole room into a hush. Someone smooths their hair. Someone else tucks in a hem. There's a spark of hope in the air. Not because the visitor is here for you, but because maybe, just maybe, they'll take someone with them. That's how it works sometimes. A woman's family might claim her, if they're wealthy enough and forgiving enough. Or she might be offered a domestic post with a new family, one willing to take in a reformed soul. Sometimes the offers are genuine. Other times, let's just say not all saviors come with clean motives. The visitor is a man this time, which makes everyone's back straighten. He's not dressed like a vicar or a doctor, probably a businessman. He speaks quietly to the matron, who nods solemnly. A few women are brought before him for inspection. You're not one of them. You exhale in relief, and then, oddly, disappointment. Historians still argue about whether institutions like this genuinely believed in redemption, or whether they were just performing a kind of social ritual, letting women suffer just enough to satisfy public morality before tucking them away again like inconvenient wallpaper. As the sun sets, you're back in your bunk, arms sore, throat dry, hair stiff with starch and steam. There's a lull, a calm. You trace shapes on the wall with your finger. An imaginary bird, a crooked heart. You wonder if anyone out there remembers you, not the workhouse version, you, before all this. Outside, the rain begins again, a soft, almost forgiving patter, and you think, maybe tomorrow someone will come, or maybe you'll find a way out yourself. Maybe there's still a bit of that girl who wore red slippers and danced by lantern light inside you too. The next day begins not with bells, but with coughing. Rough, rattling, from somewhere near the back of the dormitory. You sit up slowly, the blanket sliding off your shoulders. It's chilly again. Always is, even in midsummer. Across from you, Jane, the one who scalded her hand yesterday, clutches her chest as she tries to stifle the noise. Illness moves fast in here. There's not much space for fresh air, and even less for privacy. If it spreads, the laundry won't be the only thing soaking in boiling water. They'll isolate you, scrub everything down with carbolic soap, and say a prayer for the ones who don't come back. Today, you're assigned to the mending table. It's a small grace, really. After days of laundry, stitching holes into donated clothing is almost soothing. The garments come from charity bins, some torn, some stained, all flattened into anonymity. You thread your needle and get to work, hands moving in rhythm with the hush of the other girls around you. The room smells of wool and linseed oil, and just faintly, of salt. Not from the sea, though. From the tears soaked into every cuff and collar. While you work, the matron reads aloud from a battered book. Advice to young women in service. It's full of pointed recommendations. Speak only when spoken to. Never tempt your employer. And above all, be modest at all times. There's a pause in her reading when she gets to the section on fallen women. And the whole room tightens. Victorians had no shortage of labels. Fallen, ruined, unclean. But what they didn't have? A clear definition of what redemption actually looked like. Historians still argue whether the aim was to restore women to society or to simply erase them from view. You finish mending a pair of child's trousers. There's a name tag stitched inside, A. Willoughby. You wonder if he's still small, if he missed these pants when they went missing. Maybe he never noticed at all. The day drifts forward in a kind of fog. A visiting clergyman comes to deliver a short homily. He speaks softly, and unusually, he includes stories of women in Scripture who made mistakes but found peace. There's something about the way he says it that feels different. Not soft exactly, but human. You almost thank him aloud, but you stop yourself. That would be breaking decorum. Quirky detail of the day. A woman here, Clarissa, once a housemaid, swears the bishop's ring is fake gold. She says she can tell from across the room. Cheap brass, she sniffs. I've polished enough of it to know. No one dares laugh, but you smile into your mending. After supper, there's a lesson in deportment. Yes, posture training. You're expected to walk straight, carry a book on your head, and remember that a lady is always graceful, even in hardship. The irony is almost too thick to breathe through. What they're really teaching isn't posture, it's erasure. How to move quietly, how to be useful without being noticed, how to occupy space in a way that takes up none at all. This is the part of the system that's rarely discussed. The slow, deliberate smoothing down of personality. Your laugh becomes softer, your stride shorter, your hopes folded small enough to fit in a locket. Still, you find moments of mischief. One of the girls, Lucy, hides notes under the stairwell. Riddles, mostly, or fake fortune-telling predictions. Today says, "You will meet a dog with answers." It makes no sense, but it lightens the day. You slip it into your apron pocket. While brushing out your hair that night, you think of stories from before, of girls in dresses with puffed sleeves and starched collars strolling down Brighton Pier, of women with parasols and leisure time who read poetry for fun and debated wallpaper patterns. You don't hate them, not really, but you wonder what it's like to fall up, to make mistakes and be forgiven with a sigh and a summer holiday. In here it's different. A single wrong step and you're sorted into a category, sometimes forever. The moral rescue homes are better than the workhouses, perhaps, but only just. The walls are cleaner, but the expectations heavier. You remember hearing of Magdalene laundries, places meant to reform women with labor and scripture. Some were harsh, others more hopeful. Historians still debate whether they offered real sanctuary or simply shifted the cruelty indoors. There were whispered stories of kindness, an older woman sneaking extra bread to a girl, or a matron who secretly taught French. But the cruelty, that was loud. As you lie down for sleep, the room settles into its familiar silence. There's always a few sighs, the rustle of a blanket, one soft snore. You think about your name, the one you were born with. It's still yours deep down, though no one's used it in months. Here, you're just another miss. No surname, no history. Just a pair of hands for laundry, a bowed head in chapel, a silent mouth in front of guests. You wonder if someday you'll leave this place and walk into a world that remembers you. Maybe someone out there will meet a dog with answers. Maybe you'll be that lucky. The lights go out. And again, the coughing begins. Morning breaks early, but you're already awake when the bell rings. There's always someone rattling in their sleep, someone murmuring a forgotten name. Sometimes it's you. Today, you're back on laundry duty. The soap makes your fingers sting, and your knuckles crack open like overripe fruit. The basin water is already grey when you plunge the first garment in. It smells of lye, fabric, and a life you'll never lead. You're handed a particularly heavy parcel, a stack of gentlemen's shirts, stained with sweat, tobacco, and something you hope is only gravy. These shirts belong to important men, you're told. Donors, clergymen, sometimes even politicians. The very sort who sit in Parliament and debate the morality of women like you. The irony doesn't escape you. The thing is, the rules are uneven. A man falls, and the world winks. A woman falls, and the world shuts the door, bolts it, and tosses away the key. That's the quiet rage of it all. Not just the judgment, but the hypocrisy. Historians still argue whether Victorian society truly believed women were morally weaker, or whether it simply needed a reason to control them. While you scrub collars white again, the matron talks about salvation. You've heard the speech before. It's full of earnest phrases, moral elevation, inner purity, earning God's grace. It's meant to soothe you, but you can't help noticing how grace always seems to cost more when you're poor. A small rebellion bubbles up. You stop scrubbing just long enough to press your finger into the wet linen and draw a tiny face, a smiling one. You erase it before anyone sees, but it makes you feel briefly, fleetingly free. There's chatter today about the fallen girls who ended up on the streets of Soho, and Whitechapel. Some ended up here, if they were lucky. Others disappeared. The newspapers called them ruined and vile, never vulnerable, never exploited. That would complicate the story. One of the girls, Marianne, whispers that her sister once worked in a West End music hall. Glamorous, but dangerous. Men would toss coins at her feet, she says, but only if she smiled. A footnote in a footnote's life. You fold the damp clothes into tidy stacks. For a moment, they resemble something close to domestic peace. Maybe a mother's wash line, a daughter's dowry. You imagine a parallel life. Married, maybe. Children, maybe. You get Sunday off and walk to the park, gloved and upright. People smile at you. You belong. But that's not this world. This world demands endless penance. No matter how moral you try to become, you'll never quite climb back into innocence. You're a museum exhibit of someone else's regret. A quirky fact. One of the reformers who visited these homes, Miss Octavia Hill, used to carry measuring tape in her handbag. She would measure the girl's posture during prayer. If your spine wasn't straight enough for redemption, well, better luck next century. Lunch is gruel again. Thicker than yesterday, barely. You eat quickly, watching the girls who pretend not to be hungry. Sometimes they save half their portion for someone else. Someone coughing, someone sadder, someone smaller. There's a silent network of kindness under the rules. Later, during needlework class, the conversation turns to Queen Victoria. Someone asks if the Queen ever made a mistake. Everyone laughs, quietly of course, but you can't help wondering. She had 9 children and more power than most men. Surely she must have once told someone off or dropped her soup spoon. But no one would dare call her fallen. Historians still debate whether Queen Victoria's public morality was sincere or simply strategic. She claimed to hate wickedness and immorality, yet she presided over a society where double standards were carved into the law. Her private letters show warmth and humor. Her public persona, a wall of respectability. It's odd how women were expected to be pure, but rarely allowed to be human. There was no middle ground, no oops, only before and after. The wind picks up in the courtyard. Laundry flaps on the lines like rows of surrender flags. You stand at the window and watch them dance, white and pale and anonymous, and then something small, almost magical, happens. A robin lands on the sill. It's just there for a moment. Tilts its head, hops twice, and flies off. No one else sees it. It's yours. A reminder that something outside this place still moves freely. Tonight's chapel reading is about Mary Magdalene. Again. The matron reads slowly, emphasizing the transformation. From sinner to saint, from outcast to devoted follower. You know the story by heart. You wonder if anyone ever asked how she survived before the story started. Clarissa, the one with the fake gold radar, leans over and mutters, "I'd like a gospel about after the laundry." You nearly snort. You cover it with a cough. As the day ends, you watch as the gas lamps flicker and the hallway darkens. The floorboards creak with secrets. You know the routine by now. Fold your hands, bow your head, keep your voice low. But something lingers in your chest. Not quite hope. Not quite anger. A sense of something. Maybe a thread of identity the institution hasn't unraveled yet. Maybe the memory of the robin. The night bell rings. You lie down slowly, knees aching, shoulders sore. But before sleep takes you, you whisper your name. Just once, into the dark. And this time, you remember to smile. You wake before the bell, not from a dream, but from a dull ache in your spine and the sound of footsteps pacing the corridor outside. Someone's crying softly. You stay still. You've learned by now that nighttime tears are usually private matters, shared only with the pillow, maybe a bunkmate if trust has been earned. Your fingers are still sore from yesterday's scrubbing, and your shoulders ache in a way that makes you feel far older than your years. You sit up slowly, the air cold against your neck. The blanket smells faintly of starch and lavender, though the scent is mostly memory now. Today's assignment is cleaning. Not just laundry, this time it's the communal lavatories. You head down the corridor, bucket in one hand, scrub brush in the other. You pass portraits of stern women who founded these places. Names like Elizabeth Fry and Josephine Butler echo down the halls, attached to missions of mercy. Still, you wonder how many of them ever had to clean public loos with a cracked knuckle. The Victorians were obsessed with cleanliness. Not just hygiene, but moral cleanliness. A tidy room, a swept floor, a bleached soul, all part of the same salvation package. Historians still argue whether this obsession was about health or control, maybe both. As you kneel to clean around the base of a creaky commode, the irony doesn't escape you. You're expected to scrub away grime as though you're scrubbing away your past. The logic goes, if the floor gleams, maybe your conscience will too. The soap bites your hands again. You joke inwardly that your fingerprints are probably gone by now, erased by virtue. You can no longer grip a brush for long without cramping, but you don't dare complain. Complaining is a privilege. You haven't earned that yet. Another girl, Elsie, works alongside you. She's new, barely 16, with wrists like twigs and eyes that seem too old for her face. She doesn't talk much, but when she does, it's to ask simple questions, like whether you think they'll ever let you leave, or if it's true that one girl escaped by hiding in the laundry cart. A fringe detail, one reform home actually did have its cart searched with a hook stick, like smuggling contraband out of prison. Legend or truth, no one can say for sure. Elsie scrubs faster than you. She's trying to prove herself. You want to tell her it doesn't matter. You want to say that no matter how shiny the floor gets, people outside will still call you ruined. But you say nothing. Later, you're assigned to the mending room. Torn petticoats, broken corset stays, a gentleman's sock with a hole shaped like whales. You stitch in silence, the repetitive motion oddly soothing. You think of your mother, what little you remember of her. She used to darn your socks while humming under her breath. You hum now, just a note or two. The sound feels rebellious, almost luxurious, like music isn't supposed to live in a place like this. The room supervisor frowns at you. No need for songs, she says, without looking up. Of course not. Still, the tune lingers in your mind. It carries you through the hour like a raft across a cold stream. There's a story the older girls whisper at night, about a woman who once worked in a house like this and eventually married a bookseller. Supposedly, he loved her despite her past, or maybe because of her honesty. The details shift with each retelling. Sometimes he has a limp. Sometimes he plays the flute. Always, he says, "You deserve peace." Historians still argue whether stories like that were romantic inventions or genuine records. Some letters, found in old trunks, suggest a few fallen women did manage to build quieter, kinder lives. But whether society accepted them is another matter entirely. You finish the sock, even though you know no one will say thank you. At supper, gruel again, thinner this time. The conversation is muted. One girl got sent away today. No one says where, maybe to a different home, maybe back to the street. She cried during morning prayers and was called defiant. You're not sure how tears count as rebellion, but everything here is measured in silence and posture. Back in the dormitory, you notice someone's tied a ribbon to their bedpost, faded blue, fraying at the edges, probably smuggled in from before. A reminder of who they were, or who they still are, underneath the starch and scolding. The matron walks in. All ribbons must be removed. The ribbon disappears, tucked away quickly. But for a moment, it fluttered in the gaslight like a banner. One that said, "I'm still me." You lie down slowly, careful not to move too much. The beds creak like old ships. Above you, the plaster ceiling has a crack shaped like a bird in flight. You watch it until your eyes begin to close. There's a question that won't leave your mind. If society cared more about healing than punishing, How many of the girls here would have needed saving at all? Sleep comes in soft waves tonight. You're still sore, still worried, still unsure of tomorrow. But in the distance you hear the faintest echo of a song, your mother's hum maybe, or your own voice, rising just slightly above the silence, and for once, no one tells you to hush. Morning again. The windows leak grey light into the dormitory, dull and flat like watered milk. The usual coughs, rustles, and muffled groans tell you that the others are stirring too, joints stiff from straw mattresses and chilly drafts. You blink a few times, adjusting to the dawn that's already halfway to breakfast. Today marks your 3rd month in the house. Time is funny here. It doesn't pass in days or weeks, but in tasks. You don't say, "It's Tuesday." You say, "It's floors day," or "It's inspection week." Your sense of self has narrowed to a list of chores and regulations pinned on the wall in crooked script. After prayers, you're called into a small room off the main hallway. 2 women sit behind a desk, one in a tidy grey shawl, the other in an outfit that looks like it's never encountered a speck of dust. Their hands rest lightly on an open logbook. You recognize this moment. The moral interview, an evaluation, supposedly, of your progress, a quiet interrogation masked as concern. You sit on a hard-backed chair and try to keep your eyes low, but not too low. Eye contact shows honesty. Too much shows defiance. You aim somewhere in between. They ask you if you've prayed for forgiveness. They ask if you feel shame. They ask in low, careful tones whether you understand why you were brought here. You nod when it seems appropriate. You murmur, "Yes, miss," and "Thank you, miss," with your best practiced meekness. It's like a script everyone knows by heart, even if the lines scratch the inside of your mouth like sand. One of the women writes something in the book. You see the word remorse underlined. Victorian society viewed fallen women less as individuals and more as cautionary tales, moral lessons in corset form. If you cried too much, you were hysterical. If you didn't cry, you were hardened. There was no middle that meant you were simply human. Historians still argue whether this framing was shaped more by religious ideals or patriarchal control, or whether the two, in that century, were ever truly separate. Afterward, you return to your dormitory to find that your mattress has been upended. Another inspection. Your personal drawer, barely large enough to hold a comb and a scrap of ribbon, is open, your things folded and judged. You wonder whether any man in London would stand for this. Then again, you remind yourself, most men wouldn't be here unless they were saving someone or punishing them. After the interview, your morning shift moves to sewing. You're assigned handkerchiefs today, tiny squares of linen, all stitched with initials. Some of the girls make up stories about the people they're sewing for. Lady Evelyn, who cries only into imported lace, or Lord Banbury, who blows his nose with disdain. It passes the time. It also softens the bitterness, pretending you're making luxury goods instead of anonymous cloths for strangers you'll never meet. You poke your finger with the needle. Again, a drop of blood blooms like a scarlet punctuation mark on the linen. You suck your finger and keep working. No use asking for a plaster. They're reserved for real injuries. There's a new girl today, Molly, small and twitchy, probably no older than 14. Her fingernails are bitten down to the quick, and she won't meet anyone's eyes. You recognize the look. It's how you felt your first week, like you've just fallen from the sky and landed on a bed of stone. At dinner, you sit beside her. She won't speak much, but you offer her your extra bread crust, a tiny gesture, a treaty. She nods. You don't ask her what brought her here. You already know it doesn't matter. Later, you all sit in the hall for evening scripture. The Reverend comes twice a week. He always smells like dust and bay rum, and he talks about temptation like it's a fox that follows you through the woods. Tonight, He reads from Luke. Something about repentance and the woman who washed Jesus' feet with her tears. The girls nod solemnly. Some cry. You close your eyes and try not to sleep. There's comfort in the cadence of his voice. Even if the meaning feels warped in a room like this, there's a saying whispered among the girls. There are two kinds of girls here, the quiet ones and the ones who used to be quiet. You're not sure which you are anymore. After prayers, someone slips a note under your blanket, folded carefully, the edges neat. Inside, just 2 words, written in smudge pencil. You matter. You don't know who wrote it. The handwriting is too careful to guess, but it lodges in your chest like warmth. You trace the letters with your thumb. For a second, your throat tightens. You push the paper into your sock where no one will find it. That night, you dream of sitting on a hill outside London, the wind combing through your hair, a basket of fresh laundry beside you. Only it isn't laundry. It's books. And you get to read them. Historians still debate whether literacy programs in reform houses actually changed outcomes or were mostly for appearances. Some girls left able to write their names. Others simply memorized how to recite scripture and fake a signature. In your dream, you write your name over and over. Not the one they call you now, but your real one. The one you buried under dust and soap and silence. When you wake, you've already forgotten most of the dream, but you remember the note. And it's enough. The week drags. Your days begin in the same grey light and end with the same scratchy wool blanket pulled up to your chin. Meals blur together, porridge, bread, boiled carrots that taste faintly like old spoons. You sew, you clean, you kneel on splintered floorboards during prayers. Sometimes you wonder if you're being punished for what you did, or for who you are. On Friday, it rains. Not the poetic kind of rain that drums gently against glass while you sip tea and read poetry, but the sideways kind. London rain. Cold and uncaring. It seeps through the cracks in the window panes and turns the garden path to mud. Your boots, already worn at the soles, give in halfway through morning chores. Water squelches between your toes. You feel it soak into your socks, into your bones, into whatever sense of dignity you've managed to stitch together since arriving here. The matron scolds a girl for leaving a smudge on a polished stair rail. She uses the word filth as if it's a personal accusation. The girl, Marianne you think, blinks back tears. No one comforts her. Comfort is considered indulgence, and indulgence is a slippery slope straight back to sin. Victorian morality, in its most rigid form, believed suffering was good for the soul. Pain was cleansing. Discomfort built character. Or so they said. Historians still argue whether these beliefs stemmed from genuine religious conviction or a deep societal fear of female autonomy. Either way, you're not feeling especially holy with wet feet and a sore back. That afternoon, a letter arrives. Not for you. Letters aren't allowed unless they're from clergy or approved employers. But for the house, an inspector is coming. The very word sends ripples through the staff. You're scrubbed harder. Your hair is combed and pinned so tightly it tugs at your scalp. The hallway gets a fresh layer of wax. Even the bread that night is slightly less stale. But beneath the polish, the tension simmers. The inspector arrives with a leather-bound notebook and a face like cold marble. He asks questions about routines, morality classes, meal schedules. He sniffs, frowns, and taps his pencil like a metronome of judgment. When he enters the dormitory, your eyes drop to the floor. Everyone's do. He walks between the beds slowly, taking in the thin mattresses and folded nightgowns. Then he pauses, picks up a worn-out hairbrush from someone's drawer and turns it in his hand, like it might tell him a secret. Quirky detail of the day. At one reform home in Yorkshire, inspectors once measured the angle of fork placement on dinner trays, because heaven forbid a fallen girl Learn improper cutlery etiquette on top of everything else. The inspector leaves after tea. The staff sigh with relief. The girls don't. You know, any slip-up, even imagined, falls hardest on the residents. Clean floors aren't enough. Your soul has to sparkle too. That evening, a hush settles. No singing, no whispered gossip, just a heavy quiet that wraps around the house like damp wool. You lie awake listening to the breathy sounds of sleeping girls. One snores softly. Another mumbles something about jam tarts in her sleep. You wonder what you used to dream about before all this. Suddenly there's a rustle. Someone slips from their bed and tiptoes across the room. You hold your breath. If they're caught, it's solitary confinement. Or worse. But the figure just lifts the window a crack and leans out. A moment later, the sweet smell of night air drifts in. Rain-washed stone, coal smoke, and something faintly green. The girl stays only a moment. Then the window creaks shut and she creeps back into bed, ghost-like. You never see her face. But something about that small rebellion, the stolen sniff of real life, feels radical. Victorian society demanded control. Control of female bodies, minds, desires. A woman who stepped outside those lines was either sinful or sick. Either way, she needed to be fixed. Even if she hadn't actually done anything wrong, her mere potential for disruption was enough to lock her up. Historians still debate how many women and girls ended up in institutions simply because they were inconvenient, or poor, or too outspoken, or pregnant. You, of course, ticked several of those boxes. Your thoughts spiral that night, chasing each other through muddy corridors of memory. You remember your mother's cracked hands, your sister's laugh, the first time someone called you girl like it meant less than human. You think about that inspector and his pencil and his wrinkle-nosed disapproval. What would he do if he ever had to live as one of you? Just a week, or a day. Would he crumble? Would he break under the rules, the silence, the endless guilt? Or would he still believe you brought it on yourself? Sleep finally comes. Not gently, but like a trapdoor dropping beneath you. You fall into dreams where you're running through the city barefoot, chased by nothing but the wind. And in that moment, even in sleep, you understand. The worst part isn't the punishment. It's how they made you believe you deserved it. You wake to the sharp clang of the breakfast bell and the realization that your pillow is damp from tears. Again. You're not entirely sure when the crying started being automatic. Maybe sometime between week 2 and week forever. But there it is, seeping quietly into the linen like an unwelcome leak. The day begins as usual, but the mood feels heavier. Even the sunrise through the dormitory window seems half-hearted, as if London herself can't be bothered to try today. You shuffle to morning prayers with the other girls, shoes scuffing the wood, eyes half closed, mouths moving in practiced unison. The prayers are long, the kind of long that makes your knees ache and your mind wander. You try not to yawn. Yawning is a sign of disinterest, and disinterest is apparently adjacent to moral decay. Today's sermon is about Ruth. You barely hear it, though. Your stomach growls too loudly to focus, and your thoughts keep returning to something the matron said the night before. Some of you may be placed soon. Placed. The word is both promise and threat. For fallen women of the Victorian era, placement could mean many things. A position as a domestic servant in a respectable household, or a laundress job in a workhouse, or, if you're lucky and truly reformed, a return to your family, assuming they haven't disowned you permanently. But some placements, well, they're less about opportunity and more about containment. More moral cages with slightly different wallpaper. Historians still argue whether these placements helped or harmed. Some institutions claimed high rates of successful reintegration. Others, well, let's just say their data was optimistic at best. You're herded into a sewing room next. Rows of threadbare dresses in progress, needles poised like tiny bayonets. Your task is to patch 3 collars and re-stitch a hem, all before lunch. The girl next to you, Elsie, hums under her breath. It's a broken melody, like something she learned long ago and forgot halfway through. A supervisor snaps at her. No music. Elsie flinches and lowers her head, but her lips still move. Silently now. It's easy to forget that girls here once had whole lives. Favorite songs, stolen sweets, inside jokes, maybe even dreams of something beyond handkerchiefs, and penitence. But those details get filed away somewhere, buried under rules and shame. After lunch, boiled potatoes, and a slice of bread so dry it could double as a foot scrub. You're called aside. The matron folds her hands in that tight, bloodless way of hers. A Mrs. Penworthy has expressed interest in hiring one of our girls. You will report for trial placement tomorrow. Be ready. You nod, throat dry. The other girls don't meet your eyes, but you feel the weight of their stares. Trial placement. That means scrubbing floors, folding linens, cooking stews you won't eat. It also means silence, submission, and pretending you're grateful for every crumb of mercy. Quirky detail for the day. Victorian manuals for fallen women. Reform homes sometimes included sections on how to properly curtsy, walk with books on your head, or arrange fireplace logs for maximum moral symbolism. Because obviously posture is next to godliness. The rest of the day is a blur. You clean the stairs, the banisters, even the grates near the kitchen where soot collects in powdery drifts. You don't talk much. No one does. The idea of placement hangs in the air like a thundercloud. Dinner is stew, or something pretending to be stew, turnips and bits of gristle, floating in a brown mystery. You chew slowly, staring at a knot in the table's surface that looks vaguely like Queen Victoria's profile. It's a small, weird comfort. Later in the dormitory, Elsie whispers, "Do you think she's kind?" You blink, then realize she means Mrs. Penworthy. "I don't know," you whisper back. "She might have a cat." That makes you smile. A cat would be something. A warm lump of purring indifference in a cold world of judgment. That night, you pack your few belongings. A comb, 2 sets of underthings, a worn Bible with someone else's name scratched out inside. You tuck in the little pressed flower you found by the windowsill weeks ago, still surprisingly pink. You lie in bed but don't sleep. You think about what kindness would feel like. A soft voice, a warm meal, a fire not lit out of duty, but comfort. Victorian attitudes toward fallen women were shaped by more than morality. They were entangled in poverty, patriarchy, and power. Women who strayed, whether by choice or circumstance, were often seen as contagious, a threat to social order. Reform was not always about restoring dignity. Sometimes it was about scrubbing away visibility. Historians still argue whether some of these institutions were ever meant to help at all, or whether they existed simply to quarantine shame. You close your eyes and try to picture tomorrow. You imagine a large house with creaky stairs, a fireplace with a sagging chair beside it, and a stern but not cruel face at the door. You imagine work that leaves your hands raw, yes, but also a window in the attic bedroom that lets in morning light. You imagine the cat, a sleepy, indifferent lump of fur who doesn't care what you've done or who you were. And even if none of that turns out true, even if it's just another house with another set of rules and another invisible cage, you let yourself believe in the maybe of it, because maybe is all you have. Morning arrives with a clatter, the way mornings always do in places like this. Quick, hard, and too early. You sit up, heart already tapping against your ribs like it's trying to escape before the day even begins. Trial placement day. The phrase repeats in your head, like a school bell that never quite stops ringing. You dress in the outdoor uniform. Grey wool, mended stockings, boots polished to a dull shine. The sort of outfit designed to announce your origins without saying a word. It says, "This girl is trying to be respectable now. Ignore where she came from." The matron pins a small brooch to your collar. Plain brass, nothing decorative. It's the mark of a homegirl, though. Anyone who sees it will know. On the streetcar or at the market, you'll be quietly labelled. Not with cruelty, necessarily. Just that distant, oh dear sort of awareness. Your stomach is in knots. Not from nerves exactly. Just the slow-burning anticipation of the unknown. The kind that settles somewhere behind your ribs and hums. You remember to breathe only when you're already halfway out the door, sat in a rattling carriage bound for South London. You pass bakeries, school children in clattering boots, horses with sleepy eyes and carts full of coal. The city smells like fog and fuel oil and roasted chestnuts, but it looks oddly cheerful. You imagine what it would be like to walk through these streets as someone normal. Invisible in a good way. Just another person heading to work. Mrs. Penworthy's house is large but not ostentatious. The door is green, the kind of green that pretends it's expensive. You're met by a thin maid with eyes like cold tea. "This way," she says, not unkindly, just uninterested. Inside, the house is tidy, orderly to the point of obsession. Rugs lined up like obedient soldiers. Clock ticking somewhere, not too fast, not too slow. A faint scent of lavender hangs in the hall, like someone has been trying too hard to cover something up, like sadness. You're led to a sitting room where Mrs. Penworthy is writing in a ledger. She looks up slowly, lips pursing, eyes scanning your uniform. Turn around. You do, like a product being checked for dents. She finally nods. I suppose you'll do. Your trial begins. Dusting, polishing, lifting firewood, mending linens. You scrub the brass fittings on the banister until they gleam, then clean the scullery, which has the faint smell of damp vegetables and ancient regret. At one point, a cat slinks into the kitchen. Not yours, not anyone's really. Grey, one ear folded like someone's pressed it wrong. It eyes you, haughty and bored. You offer your hand. It ignores you completely. Perfect. One mainstream historical fact. Victorian households often employed homegirls, from reform institutions for domestic service, seeing it as a form of charitable rehabilitation. The work was grueling, but it gave women a way back into structured society, though always under close supervision. The work continues through lunch. You are given no meal but are offered a crust of bread in the pantry. The housemaid eyes you but says nothing. You wonder if she was once in your position. There's a hardness to her face that looks familiar, like someone who's learned to survive with only the outermost layers of herself still intact. You clean the drawing room next. The fireplace is framed by family portraits, all with unsmiling faces. One woman in a lace collar seems to stare directly at you, as if she's waiting for you to do something improper. You stare back for a moment, just to prove you can. Quirky fringe detail of the day. Some Victorian employers were so particular about servant behaviour that they issued tiny bells to summon staff and scolded them if they answered on the wrong beat of the clock chime. Imagine getting judged for arriving during the 11th stroke instead of the 10th. That's the sort of absurdity you're up against. The hours pass. Mrs. Penworthy inspects your work silently, like someone shopping for a second-hand umbrella. She says little. Occasionally she raises an eyebrow or makes a small note in her book. At 4 o'clock, you're dismissed to the kitchen where the maid gives you a cup of weak tea. No sugar, obviously. "Well," she says after a long silence, "you didn't break anything. That's a start." You nod. You've learned to take what compliments you can get. Back in the carriage, the matron waits. She doesn't ask how it went, just gestures for you to sit and folds her arms. "She's considering you," she says after a long moment. "We'll know by the end of the week." You don't respond. You're not sure how you feel. Is this good news? Bad? Is being considered a sign of progress, or just a reminder that even your usefulness is on trial? Victorian society held fallen women to impossible standards. Redemption was never simply about hard work. It had to be performed, displayed. The humility, the obedience, the constant gratitude for being allowed back in, even as a shadow of who you once were. Historians still argue whether this system was ever built to forgive or just to erase. You return to the home just as evening falls. The girls are gathered in the sewing room again, some yawning, some whispering. Elsie asks no questions, just offers you half a biscuit from her pocket. You sit beside her, chewing slowly. Outside, the gas lamps begin to glow, faint halos against the dusk. You wonder about Mrs. Penworthy, what her life is like when no one's being evaluated, if she ever dances, if she hums when she sweeps, if she leaves the curtains open just to let moonlight in. Probably not. Still, you hope, foolishly, stubbornly, that she might let the cat inside when it rains. You wake the next morning with a stiffness in your arms and the ghost of lavender still clinging to your clothes. Trial day lingers in your muscles like you've carried something heavier than you meant to. No word yet from Mrs. Penworthy. And so, the waiting begins. That's the thing about these homes. Not just the chores and the watchful eyes, but the waiting. You wait to be chosen. You wait to be trusted. You wait to feel like anything more than a story someone else wrote. Breakfast is the usual, a bowl of porridge that tastes faintly of tin and boiled resignation. Someone's humming near the stove, a half-familiar lullaby that makes the air feel a little softer. You can't place it, but it reminds you of something warm from a long time ago. Maybe your mother's voice, or maybe your imagination stitching scraps of memory into something that'll keep you going. By mid-morning, the matron calls you into her office. Her desk is crowded with ledgers, inkpots, and a tiny bowl of white buttons, none of them matching. She barely looks up when she speaks. She's accepted you, permanent placement. You leave in 2 days. That's it. No congratulations, no well done, no pat on the back. Just a name, an address, a new phase of your life handed to you like a dustpan. Outside her office, the news spreads. Elsie is the first to smile, the kind that's mostly happy, but tinged with something else. Something quieter. Will you write? She asks, not really expecting an answer. You nod anyway. She gives you a thimble. For luck, she says. Not that you'll need it. You're good at pretending you belong. You smile at that. A small, real one. Packing is quick. You don't own much. No one here does. A few pins, your brooch, a book of psalms with a pressed violet inside. You don't remember where the flower came from, but you keep it like a promise. The night before your departure, the girls gather around. There's no ceremony, really. Just shared biscuits and the smallest ration of tea. Someone sings a hymn, off-key and sleepy, and you think it might be the nicest moment you've had in months. You lie awake long after lights out, staring at the ceiling, the wooden beams shaped like ribs above you. You wonder what sort of home Mrs. Penworthy runs after dark. Does she bolt the door twice, whisper her sins into a pillow? Does she trust anyone with the good china? Mainstream historical fact. It was common for young women from rescue homes to be placed into long-term domestic roles under supervision. If they succeeded, they might stay for years. If they failed, if they backslid, they often had nowhere left to go. The next morning, your boots are shined again, your hair braided neatly. There's a line of dust across your collar that you scrub furiously, even though no one will care. You care. You want to start clean, even if you're not. The ride to South London is quieter this time. Less fear, more suspension, like a string being drawn tight. You arrive at the Penworthy house again, knock once. The maid opens the door, same cold tea eyes, maybe 1 degree softer this time. Come on then. You're given the attic room, small, slanted, with a narrow bed and a chipped basin for washing. But the window faces west, and at sunset the light spills gold across the wooden floor. You like that. You tuck it away as a private detail. Your duties begin immediately. No ceremony. You polish, you scrub, you iron. You learn to move silently, to anticipate needs, to fade just enough. Mrs. Penworthy keeps a ledger for everything. Meals, coal rations, candle usage. You suspect she might keep one for her emotions too. She's not cruel, just precise. Which honestly is almost worse. The maid is named Joan, and slowly, very slowly, she begins to let you exist in her orbit. One day, she lets you split the sugar cube in the tea. Another, she hands you the better mop without being asked. It's something. One quirky tidbit. In Victorian England, some housekeepers judge maids not just on cleaning skills, but on the noiselessness of their footsteps and the elegance of their handwriting when labeling spice jars. Imagine being dismissed over a clumsy nutmeg. You begin to learn the rhythm of the household, the way the clock chimes 5 minutes slow, the way Mrs. Penworthy clears her throat before asking anything uncomfortable, the sound the banister makes when someone uses it too heavily. These become your guideposts, your small survival cues. And in between the scrubbing and the silence, you start to feel something strange. Almost like stability. Almost like a life. But even as you settle, there's always that undercurrent. You're never just a maid. You're a reclaimed girl, a reformed soul. And that label follows you like a shadow, even on sunny afternoons. Historians still argue whether these placements genuinely helped women reintegrate into society, or whether they simply hid them in plain sight, punishment disguised as opportunity. You try not to dwell, you count your steps instead. 16 from the scullery to the stairs, 9 from the linen closet to the fireplace, 23 from the coal box to the back door. Each step, a choice to keep moving. One night, you find yourself alone in the drawing room, wiping down the mirror. You catch your reflection and pause. The girl looking back is tidy, pale, tired, but steadier than she used to be. You smile, just a little, before you wipe it away. Your days pass in a quiet, tight-laced loop. You wake just before the sun, to a room still heavy with sleep. The attic creaks around you as you pull on your uniform and tug your hair into the neatest braid you can manage. Sometimes, you whisper little mantras into the basin mirror. Breathe, bow, polish, repeat. It helps, a little. Joan meets you downstairs. She's already got the kettle on, steam curling like a ghost up toward the ceiling. Neither of you speak much. Words aren't really part of the morning shift, but you've both learned each other's pace. When she sighs and rubs her shoulder, you quietly take over her part of the stove polishing. When your fingers cramp from wringing linens, she'll slip you her tin of balm during supper. No grand gestures, just the kind of friendship that lives between cracks. You memorize Mrs. Penworthy's routines. Monday, correspondence and crustless toast. Tuesday, accounts and bone broth dinner. Wednesday, her sister comes over and they gossip until dusk. Though calling it gossip might be generous. It's mostly long silences, interrupted by the occasional, well, you know what he did, followed by a sip of tea and a disapproving eyebrow. Mainstream historical fact. In Victorian households, domestic servants often made up the largest part of the home's population, especially in middle-class homes where staff outnumbered the family. Yet, they were often treated as invisible, expected to disappear behind the parlor doors and blend into the wallpaper, quite literally in some households where maids were instructed to avoid eye contact with guests. You're learning how to vanish in plain sight too. The trick is small steps, light hands, and an expression that hovers somewhere between pleasant and blank. The hardest part, keeping your thoughts from leaking out your eyebrows. But every so often, something cracks the shell of routine. A letter arrives in the post. Mrs. Penworthy's hands flutter just slightly when she reads it. You spot it on her desk when you're dusting. It's from the ladies' committee. The seal is broken but not torn, the kind of careful nervousness that means the news isn't simple. That afternoon, she asks you to come into the drawing room. Joan shoots you a sideways look. You shrug. Inside, Mrs. Penworthy is arranging flowers with surgical precision. Her voice is calm, but her eyes are measuring. They say you've settled in well, she says. I agree. You've been adequate. You nearly laugh. That's the closest she's ever come to a compliment. There's to be a visitor's day, she continues. The committee is touring the homes they fund. You'll be expected to represent the program. You nod slowly. You will sit still, speak only when addressed, smile modestly. She pauses. And do not mention the laundry fire. You blink. What laundry fire? Exactly, she says, then returns to her roses. So that's how you find yourself polishing the banisters with extra care the next morning, knowing that a handful of very wealthy, very curious women are about to judge whether or not you are worth the effort. You rehearse lines in your head. Yes, Mom. Very grateful. Quite a change, Mom. No, I'm not tempted back. You try them in the mirror, testing tones. Too eager, too flat, too obviously coached. The day arrives thick with tension and perfume. Joan hisses when one of the visitors calls her dear, in the same tone you'd use for a kitten with fleas. You, on the other hand, play the part so well that one lady actually clasps her hands and says, "What a transformation! Why, she looks practically respectable now." You smile. Modestly. The tea service is flawless. The tray doesn't rattle once. You answer their questions like a walking brochure. When they finally leave, Mrs. Penworthy lets out a sigh that might have been mistaken for approval. You and Joan just collapse onto opposite ends of the kitchen bench, sharing the leftover finger sandwiches in silence. One quirky tidbit. Some Victorian households intentionally underfed their maids during visits from the ladies' committees to make the women seem frailer, more in need of redemption, thus encouraging continued funding. Starving for sympathy. It's practically performance art. Later that week, you receive a letter. At first, you don't realize it's for you. You never get mail. But your name is there, inked in a slanted hand on cheap paper. You unfold it slowly. It's from Elsie. She writes about the home, how there's a new girl with a laugh like a cough, how the matron's taken up embroidery again, stabbing violets into linen like she's got something to prove. She writes that the cat had kittens, that your old bed still creaks, even when no one's in it. You read it 3 times, holding your breath like it might evaporate. Historians still argue whether bonds formed in these institutions were enduring friendships or temporary survival alliances. Maybe they were both. Maybe they had to be. You write back the next morning, folded over the kitchen table before dawn. You describe the attic window and the way the birds sing like they've got gossip to share. You tell her you're doing fine, even if some days your smile feels sewn on with thread. You don't mention the visitors or the fire. In the following weeks, Mrs. Penworthy seems marginally less icy. She offers you the occasional second helping. One morning, she even says, "Thank you," after you arrange the tulips. "Out of habit," she mutters, as if to herself. Not that it means anything. But it does. Of course it does. You keep your head down, your steps light, your sentences short. But somewhere deep, behind all the caution and conditioning, a flicker grows. Not of rebellion exactly, just of possibility. The world may not trust you yet, but maybe one day it might forget what it thought it knew. It's laundry day, which means the kitchen floor smells like boiled starch and your arms ache before breakfast. You're elbow deep in soap flakes, scrubbing at a collar so stiff with grime it could be considered a minor geological feature. Joan's beside you, wrestling a pair of bloomers with the kind of weary determination usually reserved for tax forms. You've grown so accustomed to the rhythm of this house, the creak of the stair by the pantry, the way the third cupboard always sticks, that your body moves without thinking. You hum under your breath, a little tune you picked up from one of the nursery maids upstairs. They're too high class to talk to you most days, but songs are free, and they drift. The doorbell rings, twice, sharp. Mrs. Penworthy doesn't move, but her head turns just slightly, and she gives a small nod. That's your cue. You dry your hands and head to the door. When you open it, your breath catches. It's Reverend Camden, hat in hand, smile warm as toast. "Miss," he says, with a slight bow. "Afternoon." You glance back, then step aside. He doesn't come in often, once every few months maybe, to check on progress or leave pamphlets full of italics and thunder. You try to read his face as he walks in, but he's all polite serenity. Like a man who's made peace with things you didn't realize needed resolving. Today, though, there's something new in his voice. He's not here just to assess, he's here to deliver. Mainstream historical fact. Victorian-era reformers like Reverend William Gladstone and Josephine Butler spearheaded the rescue movement for fallen women. They believed morality could be reclaimed through shelter, labor, and spiritual instruction, though whether the rescued felt truly saved is another story. Camden sits with Mrs. Penworthy for a full half hour. You can't hear the words, but his tone rises and dips like a sermon. Finally, she calls you in. "You've been offered a position," she says without looking up. Your pulse stumbles. It's in the countryside, a family of good standing. No children, modest salary, but decent quarters. Camden smiles like he's handing you a sunrise. "The mistress is known for her patience," he adds. "She prefers quiet girls, obedient ones." You say nothing. "We've written a letter of reference," Mrs. Penworthy continues, tapping a sealed envelope. "Assuming you accept." You nod, because what else can you do? 1 week later, your bag is packed. Joan helps you fold your apron with surprising tenderness. "You'll hate the country," she says. "Too many geese, they judge you." You laugh. A real one, the kind that slips out before you can catch it. You leave quietly, just after breakfast. Camden rides with you to the train station. He fills the silence with hopeful words about fresh air, second chances, blank slates. You nod, smile where appropriate. But your mind is humming elsewhere. Outside the window, the city pulls away, brick by brick. You see children chalking hopscotch on the curb, a woman shaking rugs out into the fog, a man dozing on a bench with his hat over his eyes. The train clatters forward. You arrive at a house that looks like it's never known dust. Ivy curls politely up its walls, and a gardener trims hedges so neatly you wonder if he uses scissors normally meant for fabric. The lady of the house, Mrs. Linley, greets you with the kind of warmth that doesn't quite reach her elbows. She's all silk and expectation. Her husband doesn't speak to you. Not out of cruelty, you sense. Just indifference, polished by years of habit. You're shown to your room, a narrow thing tucked under a gable. It's clean. It has a window. It even has a small bookshelf, mostly moral tales and gardening manuals. But still, you unpack slowly, smoothing each garment like it might shatter. Quirky tidbit. Some Victorian employers believed that reading could make servant girls unruly, so they either restricted books entirely or provided only those deemed morally uplifting, usually with titles like Virtue Rewarded or The Errand Girl's Salvation. Your duties are simpler here. No children means fewer messes, and Mrs. Linley prefers to take tea alone. Still, your days are filled with dusting, polishing, turning the mattress just so, pressing the linen with an iron heavy enough to flatten your toes. Mrs. Linley is not unkind, but she is precise. She corrects your posture with a fingertip to your spine. She tells you how to answer the door without looking startled. Once, she scolds you for humming. "It's not appropriate," she says, gently but firmly. Silence is the first sign of discipline. Historians still argue whether the Victorian ideal of feminine quietude was empowering or erasing. Some say it gave women a kind of covert control. Others argue it simply taught them how to disappear more elegantly. Weeks pass. You settle into the rhythm of this quieter house. Your hands still chap from soap, but they no longer tremble. You sleep through the night. Sometimes you forget the home altogether, until you wake from a dream where the bell is ringing and Elsie is calling your name through the fog. One morning, a letter arrives. It's from Joan. It's short, just a few lines. She writes that Mrs. Penworthy has taken on a new girl, that she still hides biscuits in the linen drawer, that she hopes you've remembered to eat. You reread it 5 times. You write back, and this time you tell the truth. You tell her the countryside smells like wet wool and lavender, that the stars here are big enough to make your chest ache, that you're lonely sometimes, but it's the kind that doesn't bite. You tuck a pressed daisy into the envelope before sealing it, and you think, for the first time in what feels like years, that maybe you're not just surviving, maybe slowly you're becoming. The season begins to shift. The breeze coming in through the window smells like something between soil and promises. You catch yourself watching the sky in longer moments, how it softens around dusk, how the moon rises like it's shy but curious. Your hands still ache at the end of the day, but now there's time to stretch them by candlelight, to read a few pages before sleep. One morning, Mrs. Linley asks you to accompany her into the village. You're to carry parcels and mind your steps, speak only when spoken to, and absolutely no loitering near the bakery window. You nod obediently, of course, though the mental image of snatching a sugared bun and running off into the hedgerows is weirdly appealing. You walk 2 steps behind her, as is proper. The villagers nod politely, some offer smiles, and one man even dares a wink. You look away quickly, cheeks burning, but Mrs. Linley sees. That evening, she sits you down. Her tea is untouched. Her tone is level, but each word is sharp enough to slice butter. You must understand, she begins. A girl in your position has only so many chances. You nod, though your jaw is tight. You are respectable now, she continues. But it takes only a glance, a word, a lapse to undo everything. You know she's not wrong. You know it's meant as caution, but something in your chest hardens anyway, because it's not just about that man. It's about your past trailing behind you like a muddy hem, staining even your silence. Mainstream historical fact. Victorian society deeply distrusted the idea of female redemption. A man could sin and recover with a shrug. A woman, especially a poor one, was often defined forever by even a whisper of impropriety. That night, you can't sleep. You sit by the window and watch the moon edge past the chimney. You think about Elsie, about Joan, about the girls who never left the home. You wonder if they're still scrubbing floors under the hymn's heavy silence, or if some of them have escaped into marriages, convents, or corners of London where no one knows their names. Quirky tidbit. In certain parts of Victorian London, women who had fallen were advised to move just a few streets over to start fresh, literally living parallel lives just out of sight of their past. You go back to work the next morning with your shoulders straighter. If you can't erase your past, you can at least carry it without apology. Mrs. Linley doesn't mention the village man again. Instead, she begins to teach you embroidery. It starts casually. Some mending here, a few handkerchiefs there. But soon you find yourself working on samplers, neat little scenes of houses, sheep, and occasionally a suspiciously buff shepherd. You don't say anything about that last one. At night you stitch by lamplight. The thread slips smoothly through linen, and with it, your thoughts quiet. Sometimes you sew your name in tiny, nearly invisible script, just to prove, quietly, that you exist. One afternoon, as you iron Mr. Linley's collars, he passes by and says, "Good work." Just that. You freeze, uncertain how to respond. Mrs. Linley doesn't look up. The next day, you're given an extra half-hour for tea. Historians still argue whether acts of kindness from employers were genuine empathy or strategic benevolence, designed to pacify and retain good help. Maybe both. Maybe neither. But even crumbs can taste like cake when you've been starved of praise. In April, a letter arrives. It's from Elsie. The handwriting is uneven, but familiar. She writes that the home is full again, that Sister Agnes fell ill, and now Joan handles most of the kitchen work, that a girl named Marianne tried to run away and was brought back soaked and silent, that someone else got adopted by a merchant's wife and now wears gloves, even indoors. Elsie closes with, "I hope you are still you." You reread it twice. Then you write back. You tell her about embroidery, the daisy field near the orchard, how the stars here feel close enough to steal secrets. You describe the kitchen in the morning when the light hits the copper pans just right. You don't mention the warning in Mrs. Linley's voice, or the ache that sometimes creeps into your bones when the wind howls. You end your letter with, "I'm still me, just quieter." You seal it with wax and tuck in a pressed sprig of rosemary, symbol of remembrance. A few days later, the Linleys host a dinner. You're not invited, obviously, but you prepare the parlor, lay out the good china, polish the silver until it gleams like a magician's mirror. You help in the kitchen, and for once, the cook lets you taste the sauce, just a spoonful. As the guests arrive, you fade into the hallway shadows, moving silently between trays and teacups, but you catch snatches of conversation. "Heard she used to be in one of those homes. They reform them now, you know. Better than the streets, I suppose." You realize with a chill that they're not talking about anyone in particular. Just girls like you, like a species, like a cautionary tale. You retreat upstairs, to your little room under the gable. You open your book and try to read, but the words blur. Your throat tightens. But then, maybe because you're tired, or maybe because you've changed more than you realized, you laugh. A quiet, astonished laugh. Because you know who you are. You know what you've survived. You know how many times you were expected to vanish and didn't. You grab your embroidery and stitch something new. Just one word. Enough. The seasons tilt again. Summer this time. The sun doesn't rise so much as pour in, thick and golden, slanting through your little window and warming your quilt before you even open your eyes. The birds start too early, and the bees are everywhere, nosing into petals like nosy neighbors. You still scrub, polish, and carry, but the days are slower, lazier. Even the Linleys seem to let themselves exhale a bit. You begin walking to the edge of the orchard when your duties are done. The trees there are old, the kind that lean a little and whisper among themselves. There's a stump you sit on that's just the right height to stretch your legs. Sometimes you just exist. Not as a fallen woman, not as a servant, just a girl in the shade, with the whole sky above her. You write to Elsie again. You tell her about the orchard, about the fox you saw last week. One black ear, one white, like it couldn't make up its mind. You ask if Joan is still terrible at boiling potatoes. You wonder aloud if Sister Agnes ever really believed half the things she said, or if she, too, had once stood in a muddy street and chosen survival over salvation. You finish the letter with, "You're allowed to want more." Mainstream historical fact. By the late 19th century, some reformers, especially women, began advocating for broader definitions of morality and dignity. Places like Urania Cottage, funded by Charles Dickens and Angela Burdett Coutts, offered education and agency, not just repentance. You wish more places were like that. One afternoon the post arrives, and tucked among bills and ledgers is a letter, not for the Linleys, but for you. Your name is scrawled in big, hopeful loops. It's from Joan. Her spelling is abysmal, and her grammar would make Sister Agnes weep. But the message is clear. She's leaving the home. A family in Manchester has agreed to take her as a nursery maid. She's scared, and she's excited, and she's been practicing how to curtsy without wobbling. You laugh out loud. The sound startles a bird from the windowsill. You reply immediately. You tell her that yes, she will wobble, and know she mustn't panic when faced with more than 2 forks at once. You remind her to smile, even when she doesn't feel like it. Because the world expects reformed girls to be grateful always, and sometimes that's the only way to be left alone. You pause, then you add, but also, don't be afraid to frown. You've earned your expression. Quirky tidbit: Victorian etiquette manuals had entire chapters dedicated to facial expressions, especially for women. One advised that a lady should never increase her eyebrows in visible distress, as it would disturb the harmony of the room. You practice frowning in the mirror that night, just to rebel a little. The orchard becomes your haven, and you're not the only one who knows it. One day, Mrs. Linley's youngest daughter finds you there, eyes round and curious. "Are you a fairy?" she asks, utterly serious. You blink. "What makes you say that?" "You live in the attic, you never talk loud, and you know how to sew spells." You stifle a laugh. "They're not spells, just thread." She doesn't believe you, and honestly, you don't try very hard to convince her. Historians still argue whether Victorian children were more sheltered or simply more observant. They were often left out of adult conversation but overheard everything anyway. And in that child's eyes, you aren't a fallen woman. You're just a story waiting to be told. You begin teaching her embroidery, in secret. Tiny flowers, crooked hearts. She pricks her finger constantly and insists it's battle training. Your stitches improve. So does your handwriting. You begin keeping a small journal. Just notes, scraps of memory. Overheard fragments of conversation you find too interesting to forget. One evening, you write, "I am more than I was taught to be afraid of." The world is still dangerous. You're still a girl alone, with no inheritance, no name that opens doors. But you've learned how to walk with your head up. How to say no softly, but without apology. One Sunday, you go with the family to church. You sit in the back, as usual. The sermon is long and about repentance. Again. You mouth the hymns, but don't sing. On the way home, Mr. Linley mentions how the Lord welcomes the fallen. His tone is casual, not pointed. Still, it tightens your spine. You think about that word, fallen, like you tumbled off a shelf, like your bruised fruit. You wonder what it would be like to be called something else, something that doesn't imply a mistake. Maybe not fallen, but forged. You smile at that. Later, you visit the orchard and bring your journal. You write a few lines. Then you write a name. Yours. The one you chose. The one that isn't a whisper or a wound. You underline it twice, and for the first time in your life, you don't feel like you're pretending to be someone better. You just feel like you. The sky dims slowly now, stretching out its sleep. The orchard sighs in the twilight, every leaf still and golden. Somewhere in the village, a door closes. A kettle sings, and your hands rest, open and quiet. Your sewing laid gently to the side. The shadows grow longer, but softer, like velvet pulled across the edge of your thoughts. You sit by the window, watching the stars bloom one by one. No rush, no worry. Just light, arriving on its own terms. You're safe here. Not perfect, not rewritten, but safe. The past didn't vanish. It folded itself quietly into your story. Each scar, each silence, now stitched neatly alongside the better moments. The smile of a child who believes you might be magic. The hush of linen under your fingertips. The gentle weight of your own name, finally spoken aloud without fear. And as your eyes begin to drift closed, you feel it. Not just peace, but something warmer. The quiet joy of having survived, of having grown, of having mattered, even when the world refused to believe you could. Sleep comes easily now, like a friend pulling you into the softness. You are not fallen. You are not forgotten. You are here, and you are whole.